They didn't invite me to my own grandson's wedding. Imagine that. A day I had dreamed of since the moment I first held him in my arms, and yet I was nowhere on their guest list. For a long time, I thought my heart had endured every pain it possibly could. I buried my husband far too soon. I sacrificed my own dreams for the sake of my children. I endured loneliness in the quiet nights, when all I wanted was someone to sit with me in silence. But nothing cut deeper than realizing my family, my very own blood, thought I wasn't worthy of being there on one of the happiest days of their lives. For most of my years, I believed family was sacred. I cooked meals that took hours just to see them smile at the table. I worked my tired hands raw so that my children never felt the hunger or struggles I had known in my own childhood. I clothed them before I clothed myself. I gave them my youth, my health, my everything, and I never once asked for anything in return. All I wanted was love, a place in their lives, to be seen, not as a burden, but as the woman who held them when they cried, who wiped their foreheads when they burned with fever, who whispered prayers for their safety every single night. And yet, on that day, I was forgotten. No, not forgotten, deliberately left out. My daughter and her husband made a choice. They thought my presence might be an inconvenience. Perhaps they thought I didn't fit into the polished image of the grand wedding they had planned. Perhaps they thought my old-fashioned ways, my wrinkled hands, my plain black sweater, would make them look less perfect in the eyes of their friends. Whatever their reasons were, they closed the door on me. But what they didn't know is that when you push a mother, a grandmother, to the edge of her silence, she will rise. She will not scream or fight or cause a scene. No, she will wait. She will endure. And when the time comes, she will show the strength of all her years, all her sacrifices, all her hidden wounds. That day, when they thought they had excluded me, I decided to walk into that wedding anyway, not with anger, but with something they never expected. A surprise that would make them remember me, not as the unwanted guest, but as the heart of the family they had tried to erase. I wasn't always this old woman with tired eyes and a voice heavy with memory. Once, I was a young girl with laughter in her chest and dreams bigger than the small town I grew up in. We didn't have much. My father worked long days in the fields. My mother stitched clothes late into the night just to keep food on the table. But in that little wooden house, cracked and weathered by time, I learned the meaning of sacrifice. I learned that love wasn't spoken in grand words or sealed in expensive gifts. Love was in the way my mother gave me the larger portion of bread even when she was hungry herself. Love was in my father's calloused hands, blistered from work, still lifting me onto his shoulders to make me feel taller than the world. I carried those lessons with me when I married your grandfather. He wasn't a rich man, but he was kind. His smile had a way of softening the heaviest day. Together, we built a life brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, sacrifice by sacrifice. We didn't have luxuries, but we had each other, and for me, that was enough. When our children came along, I promised myself I would give them more than I ever had. I wanted them to grow up with stability, with opportunity, with choices I could never dream of. So, I worked. Oh, how I worked. My days began before the sun rose, and ended long after it had disappeared. I stitched clothes for neighbors, scrubbed floors for families who never even learned my name, cooked for gatherings where I was treated like the help instead of the guest, and every coin I earned, I saved. Not for myself, but for them. My children wore new shoes to school, even if mine had holes in them. They had proper meals on their plates. Even when I went to bed with only tea in my stomach, they had books in their hands, while I barely had time to read my own prayers. But the years have a way of slipping through your fingers. One day you're tying your daughter's braids before school, and the next, she's grown, walking into her own life, her own family, her own world where your presence is smaller, less needed. I told myself that was natural, that it was the way of things. Children grow, mothers step back, It's the order of life. Still, I thought my love would be enough to keep me close. I thought wrong. The distance began slowly, like a thin crack in a glass. At first, it was just fewer phone calls. Weeks would pass without a word. Then visits grew shorter, rushed, as if spending time with me was stealing from the more important hours of their lives. Then came the excuses, the sighs, the looks exchanged between them when I spoke too long about the past. I saw it, though they thought I didn't. I saw the impatience, the irritation, the quiet shame of having a mother who wore the same black sweater year after year, who didn't know the fancy restaurants, who brought homemade bread instead of store-bought wine to their parties. And then, the day of my grandson's wedding approached. My heart was filled with anticipation. I imagined the smile on his face when he saw me there, sitting quietly in the corner, hands folded, tears in my eyes as he began a new chapter of life. I even saved a little from my pension to buy him a gift. Something meaningful, something from my heart. I thought it would be one of the happiest days of my life. But the invitation never came. I heard about it from a neighbor. Can you imagine? A neighbor telling me my own grandson was getting married in a week's time. My hands trembled when she said it. At first, I thought she must be mistaken. But when I asked my daughter, she only said, in that cold voice she uses when she wants to cut me out of the conversation, "It's a small ceremony, Mom. Just close friends." Close friends? As if I were a stranger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my small chair by the window, the one where the fabric is worn thin from years of use, and I just stared out into the darkness. The world outside was quiet, but inside me, there was a storm. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How could my own flesh and blood, the boy I once held against my chest when he cried in the night, the boy whose little shoes I polished before school, the boy I prayed for every single day of my life, how could he marry without me there to bless him? I told myself it wasn't his fault. Perhaps he didn't know. Perhaps his parents kept me away. I wanted to believe that, because the thought that he chose to exclude me himself was too heavy to bear. But deep down, I knew. Children reflect their parents' hearts. If my daughter believed I was unworthy of a place in their lives, then what chance did I have with him? I sat there until dawn, my hands trembling in my lap. These hands, these wrinkled, tired hands had washed his clothes, cooked his favorite meals, bandaged his knees when he fell. And now they were empty, holding nothing but the memory of love that no longer seemed to matter. The morning light crept in slowly, painting the walls of my little home in a soft glow. It should have felt warm, but to me, it felt like a spotlight on my loneliness. The chair across from me was empty, as it had been for years since your grandfather passed. I whispered his name, wishing he were here to tell me what to do. He always knew how to comfort me, how to remind me that no matter how cruel the world became, we had each other. But now it was just me, and the silence pressed down like a weight on my chest. I thought about staying home, about letting it pass. After all, what could one old woman do? They had made their choice. Perhaps it was my role now to simply fade into the background, to be the forgotten chapter of their story. But the more I thought of it, the more something inside me stirred. A fire, small but steady. A voice that whispered, "No, not this time." I had been silent too long. I had swallowed too many insults, endured too many cold shoulders. I had given them my youth, my strength, my sacrifices, and in return, they gave me distance and shame. But this was my grandson's wedding. A family begins with blessings, and I would not let my absence be the curse upon his future. So I decided, if they would not invite me, then I would invite myself. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with dignity. I would walk into that wedding not as the forgotten old woman they tried to hide away, but as the grandmother who had raised generations with love, and I would carry with me a surprise, something they could never erase. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange stillness in the air. I woke before the sun, though sleep had barely touched me through the night. My body felt heavy, but my spirit, it was restless, burning with a quiet determination. I knew what I had to do, though every step of it ached with both fear and resolve. I walked to my small wardrobe, the same wooden cabinet I've had for decades. Its hinges creaked as I opened it, the sound echoing in my lonely room. Hanging there were just a few dresses, simple and worn, but each one held memories. My fingers brushed across the fabric, pausing on the black sweater that had been my companion through countless winters. But no, today was not a day for mourning. Today, I needed something different. At the back of the wardrobe was a dress I had saved for special occasions, though few had ever come. It was deep blue, with tiny embroidered flowers that had begun to fray at the edges. It wasn't new, it wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was me. I pressed it gently against my chest, closed my eyes, and whispered, "This will do." I sat at my little mirror, its glass chipped at the corner, and slowly brushed my short gray hair. Each strand reflected the years of struggle. Each wrinkle on my face, a chapter of my story. I dabbed a bit of powder on my skin. The same old tin I had for years, though it barely made a difference. But it wasn't about beauty. It was about dignity. I wanted them to see me not as a shadow, not as a burden, but as the woman who had lived, endured, and still stood tall. On the table beside me was the gift I had prepared, wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with a string, nothing extravagant, but from my heart. Inside was an old locket, one that had belonged to your grandfather. I had kept it close all these years, polished it with care, guarded it like a treasure. I wanted my grandson to have it, so he would know where he came from, so he would carry a piece of our love into his new life. When I stepped outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of earth and distant flowers. The streets were alive with people hurrying about, dressed in bright clothes, carrying laughter on their lips. I walked slowly, my hands clutching the little gift, my heart pounding with every step. My legs were not as strong as they once were, but they carried me forward, driven by something stronger than flesh, a grandmother's love. As I neared the place where the wedding was held, I could hear the distant hum of music, the chatter of guests, the clinking of glasses. My chest tightened. For a moment, I almost turned back. What if they rejected me? What if they asked me to leave? The thought was like a knife. But then I looked down at the locket in my hand, and I thought of your grandfather's smile. "Be brave," I imagined him saying. And so I walked on. The building came into view, decorated with lights and flowers, standing proud as if celebrating its own importance. Cars lined the street, sleek and shining, carrying people dressed in fine clothes. I felt small, almost invisible, but I lifted my chin. Let them have their wealth, their grandeur. I carried something more valuable, truth. And with that, I reached the doors. My heart pounded louder than the music inside. I tightened my grip on the gift, took a deep breath, and stepped forward into the world that had tried to forget me. The doors were tall, polished wood, glimmering under the soft glow of chandeliers inside. For a brief moment, I stood there, my reflection faintly visible in their surface. A tired woman, dressed in a simple blue dress, clutching a small brown package like it was the last piece of her soul. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, and I whispered under my breath, "I belong here." When the doors opened, the world inside was a storm of light and sound. Music floated through the air. Laughter rolled across the hall, and the scent of flowers mixed with expensive perfume. Rows of guests sat in their finest clothes, glasses of champagne in hand, smiles bright and polished. And then there was me, a shadow stepping into their golden world. I felt the stares almost immediately. Heads turned, whispers traveled faster than the music. Some looked confused, others disapproving, as though my very presence was a mistake. My heart pounded, but I walked forward slowly, each step steady, refusing to shrink under their gaze. At the front, I saw my daughter, She was radiant in her expensive dress, standing near the groom, my grandson. For a moment, I let my eyes rest on him. He looked so handsome, so grown, so far from the little boy who once tugged at my sweater asking for stories. My chest tightened with pride, even as my eyes filled with tears. But when my daughter's eyes met mine, her face hardened. She leaned toward her husband, her lips moving quickly. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp with annoyance, and I knew what they were thinking. She wasn't supposed to be here. The music softened, and the ceremony seemed to pause, the air thick with unease. I could feel the weight of judgment pressing in from every corner of the room. Guests murmured, wondering who I was, why I had come, why the bride's family looked so unsettled. My daughter's face burned with embarrassment, her jaw tight, her hands clenching. But I stood tall. My hands may have been shaking, but my back was straight. Slowly, I walked closer, the locket gift clutched against my chest. My footsteps echoed in the silence, louder than any music could have been. When I finally reached the front, I stopped. My daughter's voice hissed, just low enough for me to hear. "What are you doing here? You weren't invited." Her words cut deep, sharper than any knife, but I didn't let my face crumble. Instead, I turned my eyes to my grandson. His expression was caught between shock and discomfort. But in that moment, I saw something, a flicker of memory. A recognition of the woman who had once loved him unconditionally. I lifted the gift in my hands, my voice trembling but clear. "This is for you," I said softly, though the whole hall seemed to hear. "It belonged to your grandfather. He would have wanted you to carry it today." A hush fell over the guests. My grandson's eyes widened, his lips parting as he reached out with trembling fingers. He took the locket gently, as though it were made of glass, and for the first time that night, his eyes filled with tears. The silence in the hall was deafening. My daughter's face was pale, her anger cracked by the weight of the moment. People stared not at me in pity, but in awe, not at her in pride, but in shame. And that was my surprise. Not drama, not destruction, but truth. A reminder that love, sacrifice, and history cannot be erased no matter how much they try. For a long moment, no one moved. The locket sat in my grandson's hands, gleaming under the soft light. His fingers traced the worn metal, and when he opened it, I saw his shoulders shake. Inside was the tiny photograph of his grandfather, the man who had once held him on his lap and told him, "This boy will grow into something great." My grandson's lips trembled as he whispered, almost to himself, "Grandpa." The sound was fragile, but it carried across the silent hall. I watched as he closed his hand around the locket and slipped it into the pocket of his suit. His eyes lifted, meeting mine again. And in that gaze, I saw something shift: guilt, recognition, and perhaps the first crack in the wall that had been built between us. Behind him, my daughter's face had drained of all color. Her mouth opened, ready to lash out, but no words came. She could see it to the bond that no distance, no bitterness, no lies could erase. And the guests, oh, the guests, their murmurs had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't pity anymore. It was judgment, but not toward me. Their eyes darted between my daughter and her husband, whispers rising like smoke. Why wasn't she invited? She raised him, didn't she? What kind of family shuts out their own mother? Each hushed remark cut through the air like glass, and I could see my daughter shrinking under the weight of them. The perfect image she had tried to build, the glittering, flawless wedding had cracked, and nothing she could do would fix it. The officiant, caught in the middle of the storm, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Shall we continue?" he asked softly, glancing toward the groom. But my grandson didn't answer. His eyes were still locked on me, his jaw tight, as though fighting words he didn't know how to say. I gave him the smallest nod, my throat aching with unshed tears. I wanted to tell him so much how proud I was, how much I loved him, how I had dreamed of this day too. But I knew this wasn't the place. My surprise had already spoken louder than words ever could. So, I turned. My steps were slow, deliberate, as I made my way back down the aisle. The whispers followed me, but I didn't bow my head. No, I lifted it higher, letting them all see the strength in me. The strength they had tried to erase. At the door, I paused once more. I turned my head just enough to see my grandson slip the locket chain over his neck, tucking it beneath his shirt. The sight broke me open inside, but I held my tears until I stepped outside. The night air was cold, but it filled my lungs with something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I hadn't ruined the wedding. I hadn't caused a scene. I had simply reminded them all of a truth they wanted to forget. That love and legacy cannot be denied. As I walked away, I thought, they didn't invite me. But in the end, my presence spoke louder than any absence ever could. The night after the wedding, I sat in my small kitchen, the dim light casting shadows across the wooden table. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the silence pressing against me. I held a cup of tea, though it had long since gone cold. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I had expected to feel empty, to return home burdened by regret, crushed under the weight of all that had been lost. But, strangely, I didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't in years: dignity. I had faced them. I had reminded them who I was. The clock ticked slowly, each second stretching into an eternity. And then, just as midnight crept closer, there was a knock at my door. Soft, hesitant, but insistent. I hesitated, my heart thundering in my chest. Who could it be at this hour? With careful steps, I opened the door, and there he was, my grandson, still in his wedding suit, the locket glinting faintly against his shirt. His eyes were red, his face pale, but his voice was steady. "Grandma," he whispered. My throat tightened, and before I could speak, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. His embrace was strong, desperate, filled with all the words he couldn't yet say. "I'm sorry," he murmured against my shoulder. I didn't know. I didn't know the things they kept from me. I didn't know what you gave up for us. Tonight, when you gave me this." He touched the locket, his hand shaking. I realized I've been living a story that wasn't the whole truth. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I held him tighter, my heart aching with both joy and sorrow. We stood like that for a long time, neither of us speaking. Finally, he pulled back, his eyes shining with determination. "I don't care what they say. I need you in my life. I want you in my life, and when I have children of my own someday, I want them to know you too." Those words, they washed over me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For years, I had feared being erased, forgotten, replaced by the people who thought love was something to hoard, not to share. But in that moment, I knew my legacy lived on. Behind him, I saw the outline of his new bride, standing a little distance away. She gave me a small, nervous smile, her eyes soft but cautious. She didn't speak, but the way she looked at me, it wasn't with disdain. It was with quiet respect. Perhaps she too had begun to see the truth. My grandson kissed my cheek gently. "I'll come back soon," he promised. "This isn't the end. It's only the beginning." When the door closed and I was alone again, I sat down and finally let the tears flow. But this time, they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of healing, of hope, of love reclaimed. I whispered into the silence, as if speaking to his grandfather beyond the veil of time, "You were right. He did grow into something great, and maybe he will be the one to mend what was broken." That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully, not because everything was fixed, not because the pain had vanished, but because I knew, truly knew that I had not been forgotten. I had been seen, I had been heard, and my story, my love, my sacrifices, would live on